Hello, everyone. Welcome to IndiNations, 7 Generations Investing. I'm Jeremy Bryan, and this is powered by IndiWealth. Today, we're going to talk about from planning to action. So if you followed us here at IndiNations over the last 4 episodes, we've done our Tribal Treasury Model and kind of talked about why you do it, and then short, intermediate, and long term. Now, this kind of puts a bow on it. So this is a little bit of a recap episode of what we talked about and some of the high points of what we've talked about in the prior 4, but really kind of also providing that roadmap and finishing with, hey, just how do we get started in doing this? What are the best ways to kind of start this process of building ourselves for tribal financial sovereignty? So let's get right away into it. So as you may recall, the Tribal Treasury Model here is much more of a time-sensitive approach. And so we use time as our most important input in order to delineate the asset allocation and set the investment structure that we're going to do, because time is what matters. In your short term, you want to have capital preservation. In the intermediate term, you can have a balanced approach. And with your long-term assets, you want to have things that will grow for you over an extended period of time. And really, we think this structure provides mission clarity and protects your sovereignty. It allows you to align yourself with your missions. What are you trying to achieve? And it also makes you self-sufficient over a longer period of time, because you know you've got your short term taken care of. You know you've got your projects delineated for, and you're building the things to grow and enhance your sovereignty over an extended period of time. I think self-sustainability is absolutely part of that, and you get the investments to align with the mission. You want to start with the mission. What are we trying to do? Anybody who puts the investments before what they're trying to do is probably going to be misaligned with what they're trying to accomplish. So you want to know what the assets are for, and then align the investment structure to match it using this time-weighted strategy. So let's talk about the key principles for tribal cash reserves. This was short term. So this is your 0 to 24 months. Remember, highly liquid and low volatility. We're looking for capital preservation here and conservative risk. We want these assets to grow. We want to be able to use them, but we don't want to take so much risk, especially in these things, that we put risk that the money won't be there when we need it. And especially since we may need this in the next 0 to 24 months. So I always think you want the cash accessible when obligations come due. Things like cash and short-term investments allow you to have it readily accessible. So if you've set up your structure in the proper fashion, you can sell those assets, get them into your account, and get your things paid within 3 to 5 business days. That's what you want to be able to do in this bucket. You want to reduce market swings. You don't want to be making decisions around market swings here. So you want to reduce that downside volatility or that, risk of loss as much as possible here, while still generating some return, which is absolutely possible. Again, protect your principal for near-term use. I think that's the biggest component of this, is that we know we need this money coming up, or this is a short-term contingency that we don't want to take risk on. If we have to access that, we don't want it to be, oh man, it's down 10, 15% from where we were before because the market fell apart. Your contingency needs to be something that's in relatively secure assets as well, and highly liquid so that you can access it when you need it. For the intermediate term investing side, again, this is kind of that 1 to 7 year time frame. This is for your capital projects, a greater degree of contingency planning, these kinds of things. I think asset liability matching works really well here. This is where, hey, we know we need this money in 18 months. We need this much in 36 months. We need this much in 60 months. You can set your assets and your investments to match those payments that are going out. So those will come due right at that particular point in time. And then you can use those resources, and anything you grow above that, or if you don't need as much, you just roll into the next thing that you need. So asset liability, I think, works very well here. You need to understand your liquidity. Some illiquidity is okay, but as you get closer and closer to that ending time frame, you want those assets to be ready to use when you need them. So if you have an asset out that's 7 years and you take some illiquidity for that, it's okay. But as you get closer to 3, 2, and 1 years before needing that money, that's when you want to start to adjust that so that it's there and it's also accessible when you need it. Balanced risk and a hybrid approach here, I think that makes a lot of sense, is that you want to protect your downside to a certain extent here. And you can use some bond structures for that. You can use some hedged equity for that kind of thing too, that's protecting on the downside. There's a lot of things you can do to protect downside risk. And I think this is where that is the most important. Because again, this has a finite timeline. It might be a ways down the road, but it does have a finite timeline. Or if you're using contingency planning in here, you want to be able to have that and not have that be severely impacted by downside, because that's what you're trying to support, whether that's economic hardship or a temporary downturn, for your citizens, things that you want to support. Well, you don't want to be accessing money that's had severe loss during that period of time. So you need to protect your downside to a certain extent here as well. On the long-term side, this is your growth. This is where we want this to grow. We want it to exceed inflation, certainly, and hopefully grow even more so we can expand our projects, our tribal investments into the community, the community programs, social initiatives. You want to be able to service your community in a better way over a longer period of time. These are the assets that are earmarked for that. This is growing the overall financial sovereignty of the tribe. And these are the assets that are set up to do that. And the more you grow and the more acceptance you have of volatility in the near term to grow over the long term, the more you're going to be able to do with your money, which is really what you're trying to do as a tribal CFO or a tribal council. So you have to accept a certain amount of volatility here. These assets are going to bounce around and you're going to feel terrible at some points for owning them when they're down 20, 30%. But patient capital can lead to greater growth over a longer period of time. Because again, these are long-term assets. You've already got your short-term and your intermediate term covered. So you can take advantage of this now when everybody else is selling. You can be buying to hopefully achieve higher than average returns over a longer period. Asset compounding, you want your money to work for you here. This is where that will build up. Again, you will have some spending needs here, endowments, 5% spending, whatever the spending rate is in the investment policy statement, you want to be able to access that. So you're going to have some conservative investments in here. But really, over longer periods of time, you want growth on growth. That's what you want from these assets. And so you want them to be able to grow over an extended period. Strategic liquidity is just basically saying, illiquidity is okay here, but know your risk reward, know your trade-offs, know what you're giving up with regard to when can I access my money? How do I access it? Is there a penalty? These kinds of things. Understand all of that. And then also understand, am I getting paid to do that? You want to receive a premium or an advanced level of return for giving up something. So know your trade-offs and know if you're getting benefit from that. And lastly, and again, this is aligned with your sovereignty, is that the nation's missions here is the big missions, right? We want to be able to support our miners over a longer period of time so that they get a leg up in the next generation. We want to support our elders from the side of having some healthcare and bereavement issues and things that we want to support our community in there as well, and really support them in the proper fashion. These are the big ticket items. These are the big initiatives that a tribal council and a tribal administrative body really try to exceed what's going on and really build that economic and financial sovereignty over a longer period of time. It's normally growth assets that are going to get you there. So I always think, again, governance, turning long-term capital into a process and a system. So everybody's got a role to play here. The council, the finance department, the committee, and the advisor should all have independent things that they need to do and they need to accomplish. That is their role and responsibilities, but they're also intertwined, and so they're swimming in the same direction. I think that's just as important, as there needs to be communication amongst all these different bodies to be able to continue to progress in the fashion that you've set forth and really achieve the missions that you're trying to achieve. A lot of that drives through the investment policy statement. I'm a huge advocate of do the homework up front and get it into a working system and a working progress. The investment policy statement is that work in progress. It's the guideline. It builds on everything. Everything else that you do subsequently should build on what the IPS has put together. And then when things change down the road, you're going to review and adjust that appropriately. But everything should be the living document. The investment policy statement should be the living document that every one of these constituents is working off of. Again, clearly defined roles, turn planning into action, which we'll talk about here is kind of the process to start that. Measure progress against your goals. Again, are you achieving what you want? And the goal is rarely, I'm beating the S&P 500 this quarter, right? Or I beat bonds this quarter. Everybody is very interested in benchmarking, which I think benchmarking absolutely has a place. Don't get me wrong. You should be able to benchmark and say, how are we doing against a stated benchmark? Are we beating it? Are we not doing so well? What is that? But I think you need to take a step back from benchmarks and understand, is the benchmark actually measuring what we're trying to do? Because again, if you're just saying, well, I beat the S&P 500, that leads a lot of people to taking excessive amounts of risk, because to beat the S&P 500, usually you got to take risk to do so, right? Well, does that fit with what we're trying to do with this money? That's what you need to understand. And so just a passive benchmark and saying, well, the S&P 500 and the AGG for bonds, you need to beat that, right? And that's the only measure of progress we have. I think it's important to take a step back and understand, is what we're choosing as a benchmark actually measuring us from a progress against our goals perspective? Again, review regularly, adjust when needed. I think that that's absolutely essential, is that as tribal council changes, as finance department, execution, the committee, things will change over time. You as a tribal leader and you as a tribal CFO, you know this, right? Is that the only real constant is change. And so in that regard, when things change, you need to be able to have a review process to understand, okay, what has changed from our goals, what we're trying to accomplish, and do we need to adjust that investment policy statement to now reflect our new goals and our new missions? So understand that investment policy statements are never set in stone. The review process kind of sets that forth, and you adjust it as appropriate. You don't need to adjust it constantly. In fact, it shouldn't be adjusted constantly, but it should be looked at from time to time and adjusted when the mission has changed, so that the investment policy statement is aligned with what you're currently trying to do. Again, from a benefits of getting right perspective, the goal, tribal financial sovereignty, right? To be able to be independent, to make decisions, and to prosper your nation's citizens. I think that's really the goal of all of this. And so by setting up a process, that's how you achieve that goal, is again, from a short-term protection, intermediate term, kind of bridging the gap, and long-term growth. I think that's, if you can set that up in your structure, you're going to be a long way toward achieving financial sovereignty and independence, because you will be self-sustaining and you will have assets that are growing for you over a longer period of time. Your decisions are clear and not crisis-led. Again, using the Tribal Treasury Playbook, in our opinion, is a great way to do that. It reduces, it does not eliminate the emotion. The emotion will always be there, especially when your long-term assets are declining precipitously, right? 10, 20, 30%, as I talked about before. You're going to have those situations. But if you've set yourself up to where you have assets that are protecting, assets that are delineated for the projects that you need, and then these are your growth assets, you're better able to make decisions that actually enhance your long-term return, rather than being along the crowd and selling everything indiscriminately. As I talked about before, transparent progress reporting and communication to your citizens, I think that helps. It helps delineate the path. It helps show that you are achieving that path and that you're moving along. And if things have gotten skewed, you know the process to making adjustments. And flexible to change as needed. Again, change is the only constant in a tribe, in an environment. Pretty much we know things are going to shift and we know things are going to adjust. We need to be flexible to do that as well. I think if you can get all of this right and set yourself up on this path, this is the clearest path to financial sovereignty over a longer period of time. And most of the initiatives that you're going to do, whether that's investing in infrastructure, whether that, whatever it may be, I think all fits within this framework. It just develops different arguments and different trade-offs and things you need to understand, but the framework itself still holds true. So, as I said at the beginning, it's kind of the from planning to action. A lot of this, we've seen in other slides that I've done. This is the newer one. And just how do you get started here? What is the process? I've heard that before. It's like, we just don't know how to get going. We've talked about a lot. We know we want to do these things. How do we do it? And I think first time is, what do you have? Inventory your capital. Understand what you have for dedicated resources. How accessible are they? What do we need them for? What are we trying to do? So if you can inventory yourself to start the process of building that, what do we have in short term? What do we have for contingency plans? What do we have for coming projects in the next 3 to 5 years? And what do we have dedicated towards long-term growth? And where are these assets coming from? And how are we using them now? Do we have them already? Do we have grants that are coming to do these kinds of things? What does that look like? What does the payment structure look like? These are the kinds of things that inventorying it so that when new assets arrive or new things are coming in, you can set those buckets into the proper fashion. Whether it's like, hey, we need to replenish some of the operating funds because we had higher expenses than expected. Okay, we use some of our contingency. We'll put some into that short-term planning. You know what? The contingency plans, we haven't accessed them for 2 to 3 years and we've built up growth from there. Do we really need this amount? Maybe not. Maybe get it back to the original level and then use that growth to put it into our growth portfolio so that we can extend what we're trying to do over a longer period. That's how you start that process, though. The start has to be the inventory. Again, defining those time horizons. I just kind of talked about that as establishing those short, intermediate, long-term needs. Now you've inventoried your capital. You kind of know what you have, right? You know what you have for assets. Now, where do those assets fit? That's this part. Draft or update the investment policy statement. Now that we know what we have and we kind of know the timelines of the things we want to do, let's get that into a working document. Let's build that. If we don't have one now, let's build an investment policy statement. And again, an investment policy statement, people want to automatically just put, hey, here's what we want from a bet. We want to beat a 60-40 benchmark and we want to have this amount of assets in this and this amount of assets in that. That's important. I think it's honestly less important than building what the investment policy statement is meant to do. I think that's the more important thing is, what is the mission here? What are we trying to accomplish? Who has the roles and responsibilities to make sure that we're doing the right things? Where's the review process? How often are we doing that? Who is involved in that? And if we need to make changes or adjustments, who's authorized to do so? What is the process for doing that? I think setting that up and setting the infrastructure up is, in my opinion, even more important than setting the risk guidelines of what assets we're going to invest in and those kinds of things that kind of set up, the investment policy statement, asset allocation. I think asset allocation is important, but it's secondary to the other things that need to be done in the investment policy statement to ensure that it matches what your mission is trying to accomplish. Governance roles and responsibilities. Now that you have that IPS and you've said who does what, now you're aligning them. So you're saying, hey, you are responsible for this. We need this report then. We need this report now. An advisor is absolutely part of that. An investment committee is absolutely part of that. The tribal council, in all likelihood, will be a part of that. And the finance department, who is responsible for executing on the strategy, will absolutely be a part of this. So you need to align that. As once you have that policy statement, now you can say who does what, because you've already put that structure together. Now you're just making sure that people execute on that strategy. And then last one is, now that we've developed all this infrastructure, now we can go to action. So this, the first 4, in my opinion, is all planning. I put from planning to action. There are actions in each of these steps, but I would say you are setting the planning up in the proper fashion in the first 4. and then actually executing on that plan. And this is where an investment advisor probably comes in most places. They can take that investment policy statement and build a working structure around it. They should know the investments that are best suited for what you're trying to accomplish. And so you as a finance department, you as a tribal council, that way you don't need to know these kinds of things. You know the structure, you know what you're trying to do, and you have to go and execute on so many other things that a good investment advisor can take the structure you've built, offer suggestions for, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And potentially adjusting the investment policy statement, but then really take that statement and execute on a strategy that fits with what you're trying to do. That's what a good advisor does. A good advisor does not put a hammer where you need a screwdriver, right? They're not product focused. They are solutions focused. Here at IndiWealth, that's what we want to do, is that we're building customized plans that fit the investment policy statement and the missions of the tribes. So, as I said before, that was kind of from planning to action. This is all part of our Treasury Playbook for tribal nations. I will leave a copy of this in a link in the description. Please feel free to download it, and please feel free to call us and write us and email us, whatever you want to do. If you have any suggestions, any comments, any questions, or want to have more detail on getting started, that's what we're here to help with. So, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope this was helpful. Tune in next week in IndiNations, where we'll have our next hot button tribal investing topic. But until then, thank you very much. Take care of yourselves.